If I said the name Henri Nouwen, would anybody know who I'm talking? Yeah, right on. Just a gifted writer about spiritual things. He was also in his later years pastor of this community of mentally challenged people with special needs in Daybreak in Toronto, L'Arche community. And shortly before he started a prayer service in one of his houses, this lady Janet, a mentally challenged member of the community, said, Henry, can you give me a blessing? And not really knowing what she meant, as a Catholic priest, he responded kind of rather automatically, doing the sign of the cross and on her forehead with his thumb. Apparently she didn't feel blessed by that. She said, no, that doesn't work. I want a real blessing. And he's like, I'm sorry. Let me give you a real blessing when we gather tonight for prayer service. And he had no idea what he was going to do, but at least he had some time to think about it. And she nodded with a smile, and she seemed prepared to wait for that. And so after that night service, when there was about 30 people in a circle, Nouwen said, Janet has asked me for a special blessing. She feels she needs that now. Still not knowing what Janet wanted or exactly what he was going to do, Janet stood up and walked to where Henry was standing, and she put her arms around him and put her head against his chest. And wearing this long white robe with, ample sleeves that covered his hands and arms, he instinctively wrapped his arms around her so that she seemed to vanish in the folds of his robe. And as they held each other, he just thought to say, Janet, I want you to know you are God's beloved daughter. You are precious in God's sight. Your beautiful smile, your kindness to the people in your house, and all the good things you do show us what a beautiful child of God you are. I know you feel a little low these days and that there's some sadness in your heart, but I want you to remember who you are, a very special person, deeply loved by God and all the people who are here with you. And he finished, and Janet raised her head and looked him in the eyes, and her broad smile told Henry that she had received her blessing. And when she returned to her place, Jane, another handicapped woman, raised her hand and said, I want a blessing too. And she stood up, and before he knew it, had her face against his chest. And once more, Henry wrapped his arms around another soul and spoke words of blessing. You know what was going to happen. One after another, the rest of the people wanted a blessing, and he expressed a personal blessing to each of them. And Nouwen reflected that the most touching moment was when one of the assistants, a 24-year-old student there to serve the residents, raised his hand, and he came to Henry and laid his head on his chest and asked for a blessing. And I suspect if we were there in that room, we would have asked for a blessing too. Today, I want to pitch to you the idea of the power of a blessing. We're in this series on the sins of the father and how to break generational patterns of dysfunction. The Bible makes it really clear that sin has this ripple effect. Here's how the Bible puts it. The sins of the parents are laid upon their children and grandchildren. The entire family is affected, even children in the third and fourth generations. And as we talked about when we started this series, our families of origin mark us, for good or for ill. And when it's for ill, it wounds us. It leaves scars. Last week, we turned a corner in the series and, talking less about the sins themselves that might have been committed against us and toward the building of a healthy future, a healthy family for ourselves. So we talked last week about the dynamics of leaving our family of origin, owning personal responsibility we have for our own lives, regardless of how we were raised, and the charge to press towards the goal of breaking this cycle of generational dysfunction by living in a healthy healthy and godly way in our new families. And today I'd like to take another step toward the goal by looking at the heart of the matter itself. If the problem is the sins of the fathers and the mothers, how do you father? If the problem is the sins of the mother, how do you mother? And not just, by the way, this is not just a parenting issue. You could spend 10 sermons on that alone. In fact, there's a young families small group, I think, who's doing a great parenting curriculum, alpha parenting. But how do you parent specifically to counter the generational curse? If the father was absent, what hole are you trying to fill? If the mother was dysfunctional, what is it now that needs to be healthy? And it's captured in this one big idea. If we're trying to counter the generational curse of dysfunction, then we need to look at the opposite of being fathers and mothers who curse. And the opposite of cursing biblically is what? Blessing. Blessing. So that's what we're going to look at. How to bless your children as a parent, and how to bless your sons may be a little different than how you might bless your daughters. Simply put, blessing is God using a human like us to impart his message, his image of identity and destiny to the heart of another person, which means cursing is Satan, the liar, the deceiver, using a human to impart his message of identity and destiny to the heart of another person. I'm embarrassed to think of the times I may have unwittingly been used by the evil one in a moment of weakness and temptation to impart a curse to someone. Folks, there is power in words, isn't there? Proverbs 18 says that death and life are in the power of the tongue. Deuteronomy says that we have a choice to make between blessings and curses, between life and death itself. How many of you would like to be known as an instrument of God to impart his message of identity and destiny to another person? Yeah. May it be so, Knack. May it be so. And while Scripture is ultimately my source here, I want you to give me some grace in advance that my perspective is from someone who is a son and a brother and a husband and a father and Caucasian and who has had a relatively trauma-free life. So forgive me in advance for the things that I miss or assume. I'm also going to ask those of you who are not parents, who are no longer parents, who don't want to be parents, don't tune me out, because there's something really applicable for you here today. As with pre-marriage counseling, I'm learning that some of the gender stereotypes are stereotypes because they are often like 80% true. Not 100% true, but sometimes in my relationship, I take on what is more the stereotypical female attribute, or vice versa. And so again, filter out what doesn't apply to you, and forgive me if at times I talk in these sort of imperfect generalizations. Some of you have a mix of kids at your home. Vicki and I had best friends when we were in our 20s where they had 2 boys, and of course we had 3 girls, and they were all about the same age. And I think that old nursery rhyme, when we observed them together, were kind of true. It's like, what are girls made of? Sugar and spice and everything nice. What are boys made of? Snakes and snails, puppy dog tails, and BB guns, and firecrackers, and mud, and wrestling, and pillow fights, and dinosaurs, spiders, pocket knives, and snowballs, and endless farting. They love that word, farting. Oh, that's a boy. So let's start off with with blessing your sons, something I know less about giving, something I know a lot about having received it well. Let me start by telling you a story in the Bible. It involves someone that we met a couple weeks ago in this series, a man by the name of Jacob. But this time, the focus is going to be on his older brother, Esau. In biblical times, a father's blessing was so special and kind of a formal event, particularly to the firstborn. And, in their book on this, Gary Smalley and John Trent write that a blessing was when the father would lay hands on his son, speak a verbal message expressing encouragement, love, and acceptance, talk positively about their future, and pledge themselves to making that future happen. Well, the day for Esau's blessing as the oldest son had come, and he hunted for the right game. He cooked the meal to his father's taste, all to gain, his father's approval and favor. And he brought the meal to his dad only to find that his father had been deceived into giving the blessing to his younger brother, Jacob. His father's sight was poor, and Jacob tricked the old man into blessing him instead, which was highly significant because in biblical times, once a blessing was given, it was done. It was irretrievable. Let's just pick it up there. Verse 30, as soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and almost before Jacob had left his father, Esau returned from his hunt. Esau prepared a delicious meal and brought it up to his father. And then he said, sit up, my father, and eat my wild game so that you can give me your blessing. But Isaac asked him, who are you? Esau replied, it's your son, your firstborn son, Esau. Isaac began to tremble uncontrollably and said, then who just served me wild game? I've already eaten it, and I blessed him just before you came. And yes, that blessing must stand. When Esau heard his father's words, he let out a loud and bitter cry. Oh, my father, what about me? Bless me too, he begged. What is left for me to give you, my son? Esau pleaded. But do you have only one blessing? Oh, my father, bless me too. Then Esau broke down and wept. Those words are heartbreaking, aren't they? Bless me too, Father. And that is the cry, I think, of every boy's heart. Because while the Bible's concept of a formal blessing was sort of unique to those times, the idea of a relational blessing is still alive and well and important. We can and should build these blessings into our kids' lives. So what does that mean? Well, it starts with the blessing of love. Children need to hear words of love and acceptance from their parents. My dad, who at one point in his vocational career was the on-site pastor counselor at Teen Challenge Farm in London, Ontario. It's the largest site of its kind in Canada, Christian-based drug and alcohol rehabilitation, deliverance. We had the female representatives from Aurora this summer visit. The London farm was for young men only. And Dad had to incorporate into the core curriculum, if you will, a course, a seminar, a teaching on the father heart of God. Almost to a person, those grown men had a wound of an absent father, either literally or certainly emotionally, abusive, neglectful. You could say a cursing father, not a blessing father. And here you are trying to tell the story of a heavenly Father who wants to adopt you and love you and bless you and heal you and support you. Well, you can understand why there might be a bit of a intellectual, emotional, spiritual blockage to that idea. And maybe even for some of you in this room, I suspect there are, even just using the word father in a spiritual context, it's almost as though you need to go through like a deprogramming because you have attached so much to that word father and it's not a good attachment. But those aren't the only words that a son needs to hear. Just think back to what God the Father said to his son, Jesus, not once, but twice. At his baptism and at what is called the Transfiguration, a time when Jesus was revealed to his most intimate followers as who he truly was. And both times, God the Father erupted from heaven with a single statement. Here it is. This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. There's actually 3 blessings in that. That the son belonged. This is my son. That the son was valued. I am pleased with him. That the son was competent. Listen to him. And God says, essentially, this is my boy. I'm beyond proud of everything he has accomplished and will accomplish. A boy needs to hear that from a father, but there's more a son needs to hear. Boys look to their fathers for what it means to be a man and to feel like they are one. And I think of the example of John Eldridge, who wrote this book, Wild at Heart, and he points how men, compliment differently, how they speak to a different part of a boy's ego. Men rarely praise each other directly like women do. When a woman compliments another woman, it might be, I love what you did with your hair. Where did you get those shoes? Guys, rightly or wrongly, don't do that. I don't think I've ever told another man, I love what you've done with your hair. I don't think I have. And listen, I am so past worried about what sounds effeminate, or I could care less. I'll wear a pink tie and hold my wife's purse any day of the week. So I'm not talking about, let's get over these masculine cliches. I'm just saying guys tend to compliment by way of accomplishment. I see Glenn just devastate a slow ball pitch out of the park. And I'm like, whoa, dude, you're the man. You hit every inch of that. But you see what we're doing? We're affirming each other in accomplishments. And the best person to affirm that in a growing, developing boy is another man. Men need to hear it from other men, and no one more so than our father. Eldridge talks about taking his son Sam rock climbing, and it wasn't an easy climb, but he kept encouraging his son. And when he came to a particularly challenging spot and got over it, he said, "Way to go, Sam, you're a wild man." And after the climb, the son came over to him and kind of quietly said, "Dad, did you really think I was a wild man up there?" In that moment, he didn't realize how more hung in the balance than he could have realized. And you miss that moment, and maybe you miss a boy's heart. It's the question boys have for their fathers. Do I have what it takes? Am I strong? Until a man knows he's a man, he will ever be trying to prove it, and usually in destructive ways. Men, your boys need to hear what only you can say to them, which is that they are a wild man. They are enough. They have what it takes. But it's not just a blessing on their masculinity, guiding and shaping them into becoming a man. It's a blessing on their person, on their life, on their soul. It's speaking into and onto their life in a way that shapes how they view themselves. Take a look at what the Apostle Paul had to say to a group of people on this. He says, "With each of you, we were like a father with his child." And now look at how he said fathers should deal with their children. "Holding your hand, whispering encouragement, showing you step by step how to live well before God." That's from the Message translation. Who wouldn't want a father like that? Understanding, encouraging, merciful, compassionate, loving, tender, patient. It's a blessing only a parent can give, and it can change a child's life. I read of a teenager who had a a large and disfiguring birthmark over much of his face. It didn't seem to bother him in the slightest. He was well-liked. His self-image seemed secure. He didn't seem self-conscious at all. And finally someone asked, you amaze me. It's like your birthmark isn't even an issue for you. What is up with that? That could have been crippling to a lot of people. And here's what he said. He said, when I was very young, my father started telling me that this birthmark was there for two reasons. One, it was where an angel had kissed me. And two, the angel had done that so that my father could always find me easily in the crowd. And my dad told me that so many times with so much love, I actually began to feel sorry for the other kids who weren't kissed by an angel like that. That's a son who had received a blessing. Now, it isn't just our sons who need a blessing, it's our daughters. Eldridge notes that the heart cry of a woman's heart when it comes to a man is this. And again, this may not be applicable to every female, but I think it's widely applicable. Am I lovely? Will you pursue me? Do you delight in me? Will you fight for me? Nothing is more devastating for her to hear than, no, you're not beautiful, and no one will really fight for you. Which is why God made men to storm the tower of a woman's heart and offer his strength to hers. And to do all in their power, not only to protect and provide, but to nurture and heal, to say, yes, you are lovely. Yes, there is one who will fight for you. With a daughter, this comes out, I think, in making sure she always feels protected, that she always feels cherished. We're aware of the increasing sexualization of young girls throughout the media, from ads to video games to clothing and cosmetics. It's been well documented. It's led to damaging results as young females are led to obsess about their body image, become more prone to eating disorders and low self-esteem and depression and promiscuity. And social media has a lot of blame on this as well. Columnist Kathleen Parker did an article on this once, and then she raised a question that surprised a lot of people. When it comes to all of the sexualization and all of the self-esteem issues, she asked, where are the fathers? And I think that's a fair question. I realize, I use some pop culture examples that are of a certain generation. So this, Gen Z, millennials, I don't know, if I say the name Lindsay Lohan, will you know who I'm talking about? Okay, no. So anyway, she starts out as a child model and actress. Early on, had success with movies like The Parent Trap and Freaky Friday and Mean Girls. And then the reality of what was going on with her life kind of erupted into public view. DUIs, probation, repeated visits to rehab, more legal problems, related to misdemeanors and violation of her probation. And her career kind of disappeared as quickly as it came. And we sort of watched this train wreck, and maybe you wondered what happened. And then I stumbled across this interview with Michael Lohan, her father, and he was asked about how he felt about Lindsay's then recent photo spread in Playboy. And he responded that he was happy with the pictures, calling them a good choice, and heard that they were classy. And I don't know Lindsay Lohan, and as we said last week, there does come a time where you got to stop blaming your parents. But I do know that there should be a special allotment of grace extended toward any young woman whose father would approve of his daughter embracing pornography. So what happened to Lindsay? It's probably more of a question of what didn't happen. She wasn't fathered well. She wasn't blessed well. There's a special relationship between a father and a daughter, one set in place by God as part of the very structure of the family. From a father, a daughter learns what to look for in a man and an expectation of how she should be treated. And from a father, a daughter hopefully gains security in her self-esteem and sense of self-worth as a woman. From a father, a daughter is afforded protection, never has to worry about being vulnerable. From a father, a daughter is given moral guidance and a grounded, guarded future. From a father, a daughter should receive affection in ways that fulfill her young, developing heart. In short, from a father, a daughter ought to be provided for, protected, and cherished. That is, at least from a father who is being a father, meaning one who is blessing her life. Fathers are the ones who tell their little girls that they are perfect just the way they are. It's why fathers must be affectionate toward their daughters and compliment them and let them know that they truly are the princesses they long to be. In fact, in the original Hebrew language, which is what the oldest part of the Bible was written in, the meaning of the verb to bless literally means to bow the knee. It's giving honor and deference to someone as a prince would to a princess. Do your daughters feel that you are bending your knee? Friends, when you give this blessing to others, you get it in return. If you weren't blessed as a child, start blessing your children and see what happens to your own wounds and scars and holes and empty spaces in your heart, because you need it and we all need it. Now, in the Old Testament, there were primarily two sources of the blessing, okay? It came from the family, most often the father or the older brother, and it came from the priesthood. When God authored the blessing at Mount Sinai to be said over his people, he gave specific authority to a group of people. Aaron and his son, the tribe of Levi, were the tribe of priests. And they had this privilege and this responsibility. They enjoyed a certain closeness to God, and they led Israel in worship and mediated God's blessing over his people. And it was a sacred trust given to this particular tribe for the sake of the nation. Okay, but here's one of the many things that Christ's ministry changed. It establishes a new covenant that obliterates the need for a biological requirement of membership in the priesthood. The book of Hebrews makes it really clear that we only need one supreme high priest, the one who actually offered the one and only sacrifice to end all sacrifices, himself. Our high priest is King Jesus. But check this out. When we draw near to Jesus as our high priest, we too are welcomed into the priestly order. Okay? Peter tells us that as you come to Christ in faith, you yourselves, like living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. Welcome to the priesthood, y'all. I was going to get everybody a clerical collar this morning as you leave. You are a royal priesthood, a holy nation, and the spiritual DNA necessary to bless others is inscribed in your heart too. The right of blessing, once given only to the Levites, has been extended to you and to me. We get to mediate God's goodness and grace to one another. Now hear me on this. You have the authority, because of the high priest in you, Jesus, the hope of glory, to bless others with God's authorization. You are a conduit from God to others. You aren't a parent? That's okay. Bless others. You're not a father? You don't need to be. Bless others. Your kids have all left home and you didn't do this when they were young. Bless them now. Amen. It's not too late. You see a rock kid kind of wandering around in the hallways here, and you're like, is it my place to bless this kid? It is your place. You're part of a called and commissioned royal priesthood. Do they have to be formal, written blessings? No. Some of the most powerful blessings are unexpected, spontaneous. They're an expression of love that arrive often when people need them the most. Here's the thing, though. An unspoken blessing, what is that? That's an oxymoron, right? I'm not sure there's such a thing as an unspoken, unarticulated blessing. It does no good to anyone. There is power in the spoken word, power of life and death, blessing and curse. You need to be, I need to be, we need to be a blessing people. It should be the norm, not the exception. It's powerful. I challenge the extroverts and the introverts alike. Be a people of blessing. Some years ago, on my trip to Israel, we are in the desert of En-Gedi. There's a spring of pure water in the desert. Some of you may remember that name in your study of King David. And our scholar and tour leader talked about the priestly prayer shawl. And I was so sort of taken by it. I kind of got one as a memento and as a memory of my time in Israel. And what he did is the priest would often put it around like this. These little tassels are called tzitzits. And the priest would spread it out kind of like over themselves and the people they were blessing, and it would kind of look like what? Like a bird. And maybe they would even quote Psalm 91 to the people they were blessing. For he will rescue you from every trap and protect you from deadly disease. He will cover you with his feathers. He will shelter you with his wings. His faithful promises are your armor and protection. And the leader of our group, he came to us in little groups of 3 or 4, and he put these metaphorical wings over us and said, the Lord bless you, and the Lord keep you, and the Lord make his face to shine upon you, and the Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. And something about this ceremony, it broke me. I have been well blessed in my life. It wasn't for a lack of blessing, but there was such power in the spoken blessing. Something perhaps even broken or healed in the unseen world.